Hi everyone, it's Dot, and today we're making a low-carb Philly cheesesteak casserole. For this particular recipe, I'm using ribeye steaks as my meat. Before I even cut these up into thin strips, the very first step, it may seem counterintuitive, but it's not. They're gonna go in this freezer bag and they're gonna go into the freezer just for about 30 to 45 minutes. Trust me, when they come out, you'll understand why. All right, it's been about 35 minutes. I'm putting the steak out. And all I did was let them get a little firm because I want to do thin cuts. So in theory, this will make it a lot easier to cut the steak. And what you're doing is just that. You're doing thin slices. You just want it nice and thin for when you start browning it on the stovetop. So see, nice thin cuts. That's exactly what you want. It's perfect. All right, I have my meat all chopped up nicely thin, and what I'm gonna do now is go ahead and season it. And this is just a mixture of sea salt, pepper, and some garlic powder. I'm probably gonna add 1 teaspoon, maybe another one. And don't worry necessarily about over seasoning it too much because I'm gonna mix it up, but also a lot of it does come off when you're cooking it too. Another seasoning that goes really well with this would be like an Italian seasoning. Works really nicely, especially if you're making a cheesesteak like we're doing, but it's going to be in casserole form. All right, it's seasoned the way I want it. I'm going to clean up, wash my hands, and then we're heading to the stove to make a cheese sauce. While I let the meat get chilled in the freezer so it would be easier to cut, I went ahead and used that time and shredded some cheese, which is going to go into a cheese sauce I'm making. And it's up to you what type of cheese you want to use. It's your casserole, so you get to pick. For me, I'm using a white sharp cheddar cheese and also some Parmesan. And what we're gonna do, right off the bat, we're gonna go ahead and add cream. And I'm gonna turn it on to a medium heat. So I'm adding cheese in a little bit at a time as the cream heats up. And all I'm doing is just melting the cheese before I add a little bit more. Okay, I'm gonna add in my Parmesan, and what you'll notice is it's gotten a lot thicker, which is what I want. I'm making a nice thick sauce, but you also want to make sure you constantly stir. You don't want any of this burning. And if it looks like you shouldn't really even see any simmering. I'm actually going to go ahead and turn down my heat to low because everything is hot enough to melt the rest of the cheese I have. So what I'm going to do now is add a little bit of butter. I'm sort of adding the butter to add some fat and some additional flavor to it, but also it just sort of helps this spread a little bit more. I'm going to flavor the cheese sauce just slightly with a little bit of salt. And this is a pink Himalayan salt I'm using, and then some fresh cracked pepper. Just stir it up. And what I'm going to do is set this on the lowest setting. The butter or a little bit of the fat it's all fat, but some of it may come separate, or you may see streaks of butter. I keep it on a low heat, make sure it doesn't simmer, but it just keeps it nice and hot. It won't, nothing will solidify, which is what you don't want to have happen. If it does, you just heat it back up again on a low temperature. All right, so I heated up about a tablespoon of ghee, and what I'm going to do is add the beef. You want to cook it for a minute on each side, so that's important. Because you don't want a pan that's overcrowded, but basically after a minute you flip it, then move the meat out of the pan. I have an extra bowl here that I'm going to put the meat into. So, and just so you notice, some of you were noticing I moved this off of my burner. I'm putting it actually close to the heat source back here behind, at the back of the oven because the oven's on, so that'll keep it warm enough. All right, my meat's all done, and what I'm doing now is just cutting it into bite-sized pieces. Now, you may be wondering, why didn't I cut it like that before? I just like working when I'm on the stove in longer strips because I feel like I can control the temperature of the meat a little better. I'm looking for, I wanted it to be at least a medium rare, and you can see some pink in there, which is what I wanted. It still is cooking a little bit, but this is sort of taking a little bit of the heat off because I don't want it to be overly tough, in other words. All right, I'm going to start working on the vegetables. Here I have a little bit of duck fat mixed with butter. It's nice and hot. I'm adding in my onions now. And my goal here, it's going to be a little bit different than the peppers and the mushroom. I really want the onions to caramelize, just for that nice added flavor. I'm adding a little bit of kosher salt because I want my onions to sweat. Cleaned out my pan. I put in a little bit of duck fat, and I'm going to add my mushrooms now. And like The onions, I'm adding in some kosher salt because I want to sweat my mushrooms. I want them to release the liquid because I don't want the liquid released in the casserole dish. All right, if you look, you can see they're starting to release their juices. I want to leave them alone. I want that juice completely come out of the mushrooms. I want it evaporated because then at that point I start browning my mushrooms. I want to have a nice brown color on them. And now the bell peppers. Did the exact same thing. I added in a little bit of duck fat. I cleaned the pan ahead of time. I put the peppers in, and I'm using 3 different color peppers. And I just put a little bit of kosher salt on them because I want to sweat them. I want them to release their liquids, and I want them soft before I put them into the dish. Almost like a real chef. Not quite. Let's add the cheese sauce. And I guarantee you Velveeta has nothing on this, or Cheese Whiz. All right, we finally get to add all the ingredients to the casserole dish. Now, I did lightly oil the casserole dish with just a little bit of olive oil. So here we go, you just pour it all in. Then the next thing you want to do, you just want to spread it evenly throughout your dish. Now, something I like to do, and it's up to you if you like using these or not, because this adds a little bit of heat, which I like. And I actually, when I used to eat cheesesteaks, I would add these to them as well, is these little peppers you find at the grocery store. They're in a jar, and they're sort of basically pickled. These are Peperoncinis. And what I like to do is just chop them all up and put them on top. Again, just to add a little bit of heat and a little bit of added flavor. Now, before it goes into the oven, you're going to love this next part. We're adding more cheese. I'm using provolone as my topper, and I'm using about 4 ounces of it. Now, this is going to go into the oven for about 10 to 15 minutes. You want the provolone to melt. If you're using a broiler-safe dish, which this is not, after that 10 to 15 minutes and the cheese is all melted on top, go ahead and put it under the broiler for about 5 minutes to brown the cheese. All right, it's out of the oven. It smells delicious. I let it cool for a little bit because it was a little bit too piping hot for me. It is very cheesy, that's for sure. All right, this is definitely looking like a cheesesteak, if there ever was one. I'm gonna take a little bite. This is so good. It tastes just like a cheesesteak. No bun, but that's fine. I used to buy cheesesteaks when I started low carb, and I would just scrape all the stuff off the bun, and when I had a craving for one. But this is really good. The cheese sauce adds a nice little touch. It sort of keeps everything together too. It's just, the flavors are really good. It really just came together when it baked. When everything's all mixed together and you bake it, it smells great. My mouth is watering. I really want to dig in. Now, about the cheesesteak, just so you know, casserole, when you make it, it's up to you how many peppers you want to use. If you want to use some hot peppers, as like provolone, as opposed to different color bell peppers, which can be a little bit carby at times. You could use all green bell peppers if you want. You can leave out the mushrooms. It really is up to you what you want to do with it. Just make sure you watch the carb counts. That's what's really important. I will say this. My husband and I tend to eat just one to 2 times a day now. So this definitely has a high calorie count if you're worried about calories for whatever reason, if you're counting them. But for this is one meal by itself for me and my husband easily, and it keeps us full for the entire day until maybe a late dinner if we choose to. So just keep that in mind. But you want to lower the calories if you're a little worried about that. Take out the cheese sauce. You don't necessarily need that. But all the information is below as far as how I made this dish. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you give this a try. Hit like, subscribe, and share with your friends. And until next time, I'll see ya.